What's up, everybody? Greetings and salutations. He's Spencer Kite, friendly neighborhood Spencer man, on Wednesday, November 2nd, which means it's one question for every fight. UFC Vegas 64. Let's just get right into it. Headliners, Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos. My question is, this is for a title shot, right? Like, I know the UFC hasn't come out and specified that fact, and the UFC often doesn't because they just don't want to set these kinds of things in stone anymore. They've gotten away from declaring fights number one contender bouts because it, gives fighters leverage and you never know what's going to happen, and they don't want to set an expectation and then have to go back on that. But if you look at the landscape of this division, to me, there's no question that this has to be the number one contender fight. This has to determine who's going to fight for the title next, regardless of what happens next weekend at Madison Square Garden. And we'll lay it out this way. Marina Rodriguez is on a 4-fight winning streak. She's 6-1-2 in the UFC. The one loss is by split decision to Carla Esparza. To me, she did enough to merit a championship opportunity when she won those back-to-back main events last year against Michelle Waterson Gomez and Mackenzie Dern. She added to that by continuing to maintain this winning streak by pushing it to 4 with a win over Yan Xiaonan earlier this year. And it was sort of bolstered when Yan beat Dern at the start of last month, right? That felt, and I think Sean and I talked on a State of the UFC address, and Harry and I talked on one of the takeaways. We talked on the preview show, even going into that fight card, saying like, it feels like if Mackenzie Dern wins this fight, she's probably going to get hustled to the front of the line. That didn't happen. And because that was the first victory to end a 2-fight slide for Yan Xiaonan, it doesn't feel like she can vault ahead of someone that just beat her earlier this year. And so you look at the other side of this main event, you look at Amanda Lemos, and fine, she's only coming in with 1 win, but she's 7-1 in the division. The one loss is to a former champion in Jessica Andrade, who is a bit of a question mark and a wild card. We'll get to her in a second. But this to me is similar to sort of the Petr Yan Sean O'Malley situation from a couple weeks back at UFC 280. Yes, Amanda Lemos isn't in that top 5. She's not, on the cusp as we think of it right now. But if she goes out and dominates, she goes out and beats Marina Rodriguez on Saturday and ends this winning streak, you have to vault her to the front of the line. You don't suddenly start relitigating things when the person that looks like the number one contender gets beaten by someone who could be considered a contender. And so to me, the winner of this should have next. Now, the one sort of asterisk, the one sort of question mark or maybe wild card in here is Jessica Andrade, who beat Lemos earlier this year by submission in the first round in her return to the division. She would probably be at the front of the list to me, but she just booked a fight for January at flyweight against Lauren Murphy, which is a great fight. I cannot wait to see that fight. Lauren Murphy coming off a great win over Miesha Tate, doing work with good friend of the program, Sean Madden. And so I'm not one of these people that really wants to see somebody go up and win a fight in a different division and just come back and be the number one contender. And sort of like, I'm fine with her bouncing around divisions if she wants to sort of just find the fights that make sense and the opportunities, right? And this feels a little bit like hey, I'd really like to fight in Rio opportunity for Andrade, who has moved to Vegas, and this gives her a chance to go back to Brazil to compete. Cool, great. She'll probably have something to say if Amanda Lemos goes out and wins on Saturday because she does hold that victory over her. But if Rodriguez wins, I don't even think that Jessica Andrade can make a case because it's only 1 win in the division. As great as she's been in the past, as much as her former championship reign gives her some sway, it's not enough to jump to the front of the list. And the name that I'm sure everybody's wondering, what about, is Rose Namajunas, the former champion. And to me, she's out of the mix right now. And I don't say that like Rose can't get back into the mix quickly. However, as I record this, she is doing media, or was just recently doing media, in Austin, Texas for the release of the documentary Thug Rose, a Mixed Martial Artist, which I believe will be on Fight Pass probably today or tomorrow. So go check that out. She hasn't fought since that fight with Carla Esparza where she lost the title. It was a pedestrian affair. Nobody is rushing to go and rewatch that. And so to me, regardless of her pedigree, regardless of her previous results, being a two-time champion, she needs to get one back in the win column before she jumps to the head of the line and fights for the title again. Especially if Carla Esparza retains, because Carla Esparza is now 2-0 against Rose Namajunas. But even if Zhang Weili wins next week at MSG at UFC 281, and sure, you can make the argument, and you could say rightfully, understandably, it's not an argument. Rose is 2-0 against Zhang Weili. Doesn't matter. That last fight was so uninteresting and so lacking in entertainment that she needs to go out and do something. It doesn't matter that she's beaten Zhang Weili twice. Give Marina Rodriguez or Amanda Lemos, whoever wins this fight, the next opportunity and tell Rose, yeah, you can be in there. Just go and win one and show us something, because we didn't see a lot last time. And I think that's part of the reason, and we'll probably talk about this a bunch next week, that Carla Esparza is getting Zhang Weili here and not Marina Rodriguez. Because Zhang Weili next week feels like a more bankable, entertaining fight than maybe Marina Rodriguez, because we've seen that fight and stretches of it played out on the ground blanket style. And so to me, this fight this weekend should just be for the number one contender. The UFC should, in my opinion, crank the volume up to 11, promote the hell out of this. All the intro packages, all of the press and media over the next couple of days needs to be talking about these two women as the winner gets next. Whoever wins this is fighting for the title in 2023. Give people an additional reason to tune in. Tune in because it's a great fight. Like, don't get me wrong. Terrific fight. Cannot wait for this fight. But give people that extra hook. Give them that reason to pay extra attention to the talented females that don't speak English, that if they win, we're not going to get them demanding a title shot the way that we want people to demand title shots, right? It's going to be Fabiano Bushki, the great translator in there, giving us the translation, and he will put juice on it. He will put spice on it. He'll do it upright. He does a great job at what he does, but it's not necessarily the same as when we have seen people go in there and say, I got next. And so it's incumbent on the UFC to set that bar and put that out there for people, that the winner of this is going to challenge for gold next year, because they should. They've done enough. Whoever wins this fight will have done enough to get that opportunity, to merit that opportunity. And I just hope that's the way it plays out. Co-main event, welterweights, Neil Magny and Daniel Rodriguez. My question is, do you understand how good these two guys are? And I say that because I think I know the answer. And that answer is, people don't really quite fully grasp or recognize how good these guys are. So I'm going to the notes here. I'm going to the second screen just to make sure we get everything correct. Neil Magny is 19-8 in the UFC. He's 18-6 since beginning his career. The victory over John Manley and then 2 straight losses. And he's only lost to quality fighters. Like, he's not lost to, like, there's no banana peels in there. It's all ranked fighters. It's all good talent. Rodriguez is 7-1 in the UFC. He's 17-2 overall. And he's got wins over Mike Perry, Kevin Lee, and most recently Li Jingliang. Yes, split decision. Yes, a lot of people thought the Leech won. Fine. It stands. The result says he won. He won 7-1. And so combined, they're 26-9 inside the octagon in a division that has been one of the premier divisions throughout their combined time in the UFC and for years on end. And while I know the argument is going to be that neither of these guys have been top 5 fighters, neither of them has fought for a title or any come close to that even, truthfully, though Magny has been like fringe at one point. My response to that is layered, right? First and foremost, there are lots of people that never fought for UFC titles that are terrific fighters, and lots of people that never, made it into the top 5 in their division because the division was just so goddamn good when they were around. Additionally, we have to stop thinking about talent just strictly as a function or just strictly as a measure of the number next to someone's name, and not the totality of what they've done, and not have an appreciation for the totality of what they've done, right? Because there's a lot of people that have come and gone in the UFC that got a lot more press, that rose through the ranks faster or higher than Neil Magny has in his career, than Daniel Rodriguez has to date. But they burned out hard and bright and disappeared. Like Mike Perry had more popularity, got more opportunities, more main events, all of those things. Daniel Rodriguez whooped him, and Mike Perry's not in the UFC anymore. And so at some point, we need to give recognition to these athletes, to the people that have longevity. Like, it is hard to be as good as Neil Magny has been for this long at this level. It just is. And I say it all the time, and he's going to continue to be a fixture on my programming. But Jeremy Stephens made a hell of a career, had a wonderful career, being like the 6 to 9 in the featherweight division, right? He didn't fight for a title. He didn't break into the top 5. I think he may have at one point for a hot second when he was winning those fights. And I think it was after the Josh Emmett fight, he probably crept into the top 5, but that didn't hold for very long. But that doesn't mean that Jeremy Stephens didn't have a successful career fighting at 145. Like, that can't be the measure, right? I say it all the time. It's my other one here. Michael Bisping, before he won that title, before he knocked out Luke Rockhold at UFC 199, was a guy that hadn't fought for gold, that hadn't broken into the top 5, that wasn't in that upper echelon at middleweight. But he had a hell of a career. Were you going to tell Michael Bisping, or are you going to look at Michael Bisping and say, that wasn't a good career? Great career. Great career. Got people interested in fights, got people invested in fights that they had no business being invested in, because he could crank up the volume on his promos and turn everything into a grudge match just to sell pay-per-views and to draw interest. And then he went out and, won a title and Hall of Fame and all of that stuff now. But before that, he was Neil Magny. He was the guy that hung out for a long time at sort of 6 through 8. Couldn't beat the guys ahead of him, beat a bunch of guys behind him. That's who he was, right? Go look at Mike Bisping's record. That's who he was. And then he beat Anderson Silva in London, and he beat Luke Rockhold in Los Angeles. And it changed the way we talk about him. It changed the way we think about him. And while I don't think either of these guys are going to do that at this stage of their career, each of them come in on Saturday age 35, they deserve credit and they deserve recognition for what they've done. And I think more people really need to acknowledge, and I hope we hear it again on the broadcast. John Anik's very good throughout his career at sort of spotlighting guys like this. And I know he's done it with Neil Magny in the past. And so I hope we get that again on Saturday. Whoever's on the call, I'm not sure who's doing the broadcast, whether it's Anik, whether it's Fitz. Give some love to these guys. Make sure to shout out that what they've done is really impressive, because I don't think enough people truly understand how good these two guys are. Middle fight on the main card. Heavyweights Chase Sherman and Josh Parisian. And my question is, why are we doing this again? Now listen, I understand that bout orders get determined well in advance, so it's not like last week happened and the UFC is going to just instantly pivot. But last week happened, and 7 of these types of fights have happened this year. Heavyweight fights between unranked competitors that instantly, guys like me, serious fans, people that watch regularly, will look at the main card and go, Well, that seems out of place, right? It's the Sesame Street, one of these things that doesn't belong. And so I just really hope that at some point the UFC sort of recognizes this. And look, we all know, we all understand. We talked about it last week. The hope is, and the ideal is, that because they're heavyweights, they go out, they sling bombs, and somebody gets lit up. And we end quick, and we end violent, and it's a big highlight, and away we go. And that may be the case. That could happen. But even if it does, like, nobody's coming away from Saturday going, man, did you see that knockout from Sherman to move to 4-9 in the UFC? Hey, did you see that great finish by Josh Parisian as he picked up his third UFC win by beating a guy that has 9 losses in the UFC? The other weird part about sort of this, and as I mentioned, it's happened 7 times this year. So those 7 fights, which would be 14 fighters, right? 7 pairs of fighters. They've only involved 10 fighters. Like it's 10 athletes. So it's Jake Collier, Sherman, Parker Porter, Alain Baudot, Josh Parisian, Jared Vanderaa, Rodrigo Nascimento, Tanner Boser. Like it's not a lot of guys. It's the same bunch of guys. And then, sorry, to finish that off, Waldo Cortez Acosta last week. And I think I skipped Andre Arlovsky in there, but it's the same guys, right? Like it's the same collection of outside the top 15, not getting into the top 15 heavyweights that we don't need to see here. And look, I am the guy that earlier this year wrote a piece saying fight card placement doesn't matter from a talent perspective, from a how we talk about the fights perspective, as media, as experts. Shouldn't matter if somebody's on the prelims or the main card or the main event. If it is a great fight, we need to talk about it as a great fight. That being said, I fully acknowledge and understand that where these fights line up, there are loads of people that still look at the main card and go, these are the best fights. Even though that's rarely the case. The main card is rarely the 5 or 6 best fights of the night. Sometimes even not on pay-per-view. And so to constantly throw a fight like this in there when people still feel that way and still think that way and look that way to these cards feels like a wasted opportunity, because there are some fights later on in this event that should have main card placement and should get a little more recognition and coverage and spotlight and talking about, because it's a better fight with better ramifications or more upside to it. Even if it's just one side of the fight deserves that showcase, because they're going to be somewhere further down the road than either of these two gentlemen. And I don't say it to like slam either of these two guys. Josh Parisian, great dude. I've talked to him a few times. I know my guy Mikey Batts says I look like him, so there's that. Like, there's just no need. There's just no need. So hopefully at some point the UFC realizes that they're not getting the results that they hope for. That's the other part of this before I wrap. Of those 7 fights so far this year, only 3 of them have been TKOs. Only 3 of them have been finishes. Only one of them has been in the first round, and that was Jake Collier submitting Sherman. And none of them have been memorable for like good reasons. Sherman's win last time is memorable because Jared Vanderaa should have beaten him, didn't, and then lost. We got to do better than this, especially on main cards. Next up, we move to the flyweight division. Tagir Ulanbekov and Nate Maness. My question is, can Maness become a factor in the flyweight division? He went 3-1 at bantamweight. The one loss is to, last time out, to Umar Nurmagomedov. He earned victories over Johnny Munoz Jr., who fights this weekend as well, Luke Sanders, and Tony Gravely, which was a very good win. He's 14-2 overall. His other loss is to Taylor Lapulus, who fought in the UFC at one point in his UFC caliber. He has good size. He has good power. He's got good finishing instincts. Like, this is an interesting shift down a division. And I talked to Nate Maness ahead of this fight. The story is up on UFC.com now. And, had the laugh of, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of shit for moving down after your one loss. He said, look, I didn't lose to a scrub. And he's the only guy thus far that has gone the distance with Umar Nurmagomedov. And so he thinks it's just the right division. He's done it all the right way. He's had a lot of lead time for this fight. He's done all the work with the PI and done all of his sort of health and nutrition numbers and metrics and all of those things. So I don't foresee there being a problem in terms of him making the weight or looking like death warmed over on Friday. And if that's the case, if he really does move down well and everything transfers with him, he's got a chance to be interesting, right? Because Ulanbekov, even though he's coming off a loss to Tim Elliott, is still an intriguing guy, part of that Khabib camp with Islam Makhachev and Nurmagomedov and various fighters like that. He was ranked up until very recently when Muhammad Makhachev moved into the rankings. This is a good fight. This is a very, very good litmus test for Nate Maness. And if he goes out and looks good, shows well, gets a victory, maybe he doesn't slide right into the top 15, but he instantly establishes himself as another guy that we get to pay attention to and that becomes a cool matchup partner, a cool dance partner for some of these other athletes that are in that lower third of the rankings. And so very curious to see how this one plays out on Saturday, because I think it has a lot of long-term ramification possibilities. All depends on how it plays out. All depends on how Nate looks. But if he looks good, if he looks as good as he says he's been feeling, this could be interesting. Last fight of the main card, lightweights Grant Dawson and Mark O. Madsen coming together on short notice. And the question is just who takes another step forward. This is a fantastic fight, and it's a short notice fight. Madsen was supposed to fight Drakkar Klose last weekend. Klose blew out his ACL. Hope he recovers soon. Wish him well. He had been off for a long time. He got back in the win column earlier this year, got a second win. So it's a tough blow. It was a tough blow for Madsen as well. I spoke to him ahead of this fight. He had moved his family to the United States, to Paradise Valley, Arizona, following his win over Vince Pichel earlier this year. So he was chomping at the bit to get in there, but also to get the right type of opponent, right? He's a 36-year-old, 37-year-old former Olympian, Olympic medalist, 12-0 in mixed martial arts, 5-0 in the UFC, trying to make a run at this. And so he doesn't really have a ton of time or a ton of room to just take fights to stay busy, right? Competitive side of him was like, yeah, I'll fight anybody. Just put someone in the cage with me. Don't let me burn this training camp. And then the actual understanding the situation side of him was like, ideally it's somebody that makes sense. Well, Grant Dawson makes sense. Dawson is 18-1-1 with one no contest in his career. He's 6-0-1 in the UFC. He's coming off a third round submission win over Jared Gordon. He is a very talented fighter that is now down at American Top Team after being at Glory for a long time. This is a great fight. They're both coming off the biggest wins of their career. They're both looking to move forward in a division that has some movement right now, right? We got a new champion a couple of weeks ago. We've got that triumvirate of veterans near the top, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler. They fight next week, and Justin Gaethje. But then we've got the new blood and sort of the young, interesting guys behind that, right? Beneil Dariush, Rafael Fiziev, Jalen Turner a little further back. This is starting to pick up. And the winner of this one, well, they probably don't run into the rankings. They probably don't elevate all the way into the rankings. They get close, and they're maybe fighting somebody in that bottom half of the top 15. And that's important. That's when we start getting to big, meaningful fights, big, important fights, big opportunities. And so this is sort of the appetizer for that. The winner of this gets a big name next time out, gets an important name, I'll say. Maybe not a big name, but a meaningful name and a very meaningful fight next time out. So please pay attention to this one. I want to see how it plays out because each of these guys have looked very good. I want to see what Madsen looks like after relocating and being here full-time, being in the States full-time, working with Fight Ready. I want to see how much better Dawson has gotten in his second camp with ATT. It's going to be a great fight. Move a little further down. Darrick Minner and Shayilan Nuerdanbieke. My question is Nuerdanbieke someone we need to keep an eye on going forward? So I think we're starting to learn that these Chinese athletes that have 20, 30 fights under the WLF Wars promotion banner, slowed down to make sure I got that out right. You kind of have to not ignore it, but you have to take those fights and those results with several heaping tablespoons of salt. Because if you go and look at Nuerdanbieke or Sumerdarji or Rongju, who have all of these fights and all of this experience, especially when they're really young, to where they're having 10, 12, 13 fights a year, you kind of got to throw that out a little bit, because how much are you learning? How much are you developing? What's the caliber of opponent you're facing to get to where you are? Right. So Nuerdanbieke comes into this fight. I believe he's like 38-10, something ridiculous, right? That doesn't really fit with a fighter that's 28 years old. But over his last two fights in the UFC, he's looked good, scored good wins, right? Beat Sean Soriano, beat TJ Brown. Good wins where he showed some wrestling, where he showed some toughness and some grit and a little bit of sandpaper to him. He's now down training with Sean Soriano at Kill Cliff FC. And he's just one of those guys that, you know, not beating Darrick Minner isn't a huge feather in your cap, but it's a good win over another sort of tough veteran guy that has a bunch of experience, that has gotten a few good UFC victories, that gave some people some headaches. And it sort of would move Nuerdanbieke beyond that, fighting the low tier veteran guys, fighting that, move him into that middle of the pack sort of in the division. And so I just want to see if what we've seen over these last couple of fights is real, is valid, is meaningful, or was he just beating guys that are just a tier behind him or just a little bit behind him? This is going to be one of those fights that sort of lets us know where he's at and what to expect going forward. Next up, flyweight division, Miranda Maverick versus Shanna Young. My question is, can Maverick make a statement here? She was, if you've visited the website, if you've visited Severe MMA so far this week, she is my fighter to watch. Hopefully that's not a curse, because Chase Hooper was my fighter to watch last week and he got lit the hell up by Steve Garcia. I don't think it will be. I think Miranda Maverick is much better than Chase Hooper. So this to me is a fight where if you are going to be a top 15 fighter and a potential contender going forward, and I do believe that Miranda Maverick is or will be both things within the next few years, then this is a fight where you go out and smash Shanna Young. She's beaten her once. It was the semifinals of the Invicta Phoenix Rising Series tournament a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, which Maverick won, beat Victoria Leonardo in the opening round, Shanna Young in the second round, won the whole thing by beating Deanna Bennett. Part of what propelled her into the UFC. I think she's on a completely different level. And this is one of those ones where, okay, show me. Like, I'm not disappointed if she goes out and just gets a victory, because look, win fights, move forward. Always the goal. But if you're going to be, if you're going to be something more than just part of this division, and you're going to be back in the top 15, and you want to be part of that group with Erin Blanchfield, Casey O'Neill, Macy Barber, sort of that big, make a big four of emerging 25 and under talents in the 125 pound weight class. And I think that group has that potential, as I wrote in the piece earlier this week on the website. This is where you go out and show it. This is where you go and show, I am orders of magnitude better than this woman. And I'm ready to start fighting some of these more established names, some of these people that have a little bit more clout and a little bit more experience, and show what I can do. She looked great last time out against Sabina Mazo. Second fight working with Elliot Marshall and the crew in Denver. See what happens here. This is a show out opportunity, and I want to see if we get it. Move to the bantamweight division. Mario Bautista versus Benito Lopez. And my question is, how is there no one else for Mario Bautista to fight? Like, no disrespect whatsoever to Benito Lopez. Welcome back. Good to have you back. But how is Bautista fighting a guy that hasn't fought in 3.5 years? When he's coming off 2 wins, he's coming off a first-round submission win over Brian Boom Kelleher, a good seasoned veteran, beat Jay Perrin earlier this year. He's 4-1 over his last 5 fights. Lost his debut to Corey Sandhagen. We can throw that one out. It does not count in my books. It's officially, it counts, but you know what I mean. And so, like, I see this matchup, and I like Mario Bautista. I think he has upside. He's 28. He comes from the MMA lab. He's fundamentally sound. He's well coached. He does a lot of things really well. Another guy to sort of keep tabs on. You can see me getting excited in this bantamweight division where there's a lot of guys to keep tabs on, and it's great and it's competitive. It's fun. How is he fighting a guy that hasn't fought in 3 years? And when he did fight last, beat Vince Morales and lost to Manny Bermudez before that. It just doesn't make sense to me, because I look at the division and I look at sort of where I think Mario Bautista is, right? He's not ranked. So for me, he's in the second 15. That includes guys like Adrian Yanez, Kyler Phillips, Davey Grant, Timur Valiev, Casey Kenny, though they may be teammates. Like, none of those people are available. None of those guys have fights booked right now. They haven't fought recently enough that it's like, oh, they're out. So like, this just, like, cool that Mario Bautista is back. Looking forward to seeing it, but it just doesn't really make sense to me. Like, this is a guy that maybe we should be looking at as coming forward and trying to make some moves here. Maybe like following a little bit of the Ricky Simone, right? Ricky Simone had a 2-year run where he started putting some wins together and making some noise before he got into the rankings where he is now, after knocking out Rafael Assunção and then beating Jack Shore. Bautista feels a little similar to me in that regard. And so I just, after choking out Boom in the first round, I expected another step up, not, hey, be the guy that welcomes Benito Lopez back. And look, Lopez had some buzz at one point, right? Contender Series grad, Team Alpha Male guy, undefeated when he got to the UFC. But that was 3.5 years. I mean, it's 3.5 years since he fought. That was like 5 years ago when he was that guy. And so just feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. And look, maybe Bautista's team is just thinking, we go out, we get this win over this dude that's coming back, we make it 3 straight, and we're in even better position. And more power to him if that's what they think, if that's what happens. Great. I look forward to it, because I think Mario Bautista can move forward in this division. It's a tough division. It's a super competitive division. I think he's the goods. I think he's good enough to keep going forward. And I hope he gets a better fight than this next time out. Next up, women's strawweight, Polyana Viana, Jinh Frey. My question is, that there's sometimes that fights are just fights, right? Like, we come on here, I come on here, we come on the preview show, we talk all the time about the ramifications, about the jeopardy, about the stakes, about narratives and stories and all of those things, which are all important, which are all valid, which are all meaningful, which I love doing. But sometimes you have fights that are just two people that are going to fight. And this is one of those times. I'm not saying that to disparage either of these women who are both 2 and 3 in the UFC. But like, this is just like, nobody moves particularly further forward with a win. Nobody's in real peril with a loss. It's just a fight. And I'm okay with that. Like, sometimes you just need a fight. Like, Major League Baseball needs a guy that, baseball teams need a guy that can pitch the 6th or 7th inning, or give them 2 innings in a blowout, or a fifth starter that can just eat some innings. Fight cards need fights like this, and I'm okay with it. Jinh Fry's looked mostly good in her last 3 fights. Polyana Viana won 2 fights before her most recent setback. Let's see who's made a few changes and figured a couple of things out and maybe, sorted out whatever went wrong last time. But like, I don't need this to be some big, meaningful, super important fight. It's just an all right fight. It's a nice fight in the middle of this card, in the middle of these prelims. We'll see what happens. I'm going to turn around for 1 second, stop my dog from eating my garbage. Hold on. Thank you for bearing with me. We're back. We move to the bantamweight division. Liudvik Sholinian versus Johnny Munoz Jr., who I mentioned earlier. My question is, can I resubmit my argument for 10-day contracts in the UFC? So earlier this year on one of these series, back when it was at Keyboard Kimura, I posited that the UFC needs to take a page from the NBA and adopt sort of their own version of 10-day contracts. And what I mean is, so in the NBA, you can sign a guy to a 10-day contract. If you want to keep him after that, you can sign him to another 10-day. And then after the 2, you have to decide, are you going to roster him for the year or are you going to let them go? Most of the time, they get signed, they don't play. Maybe they get the second 10-day and then they go, as my dog steals stuff out of my garbage. And I think the UFC needs to adopt some of that. Like, Sholinian is one of those guys that was on the Ultimate Fighter season 29. He lost in the semis. He picked up a short notice fight against Jack Shore. He lost that fight. And so in theory, this is his thank you fight, right? This is his, we appreciate you doing us a favor. Here's another fight, a chance to get a victory, whatever. The roster is so full of people at this point, especially with, the influx of talent that's coming through from Contender Series each summer and fall now, where we're getting 30 and almost 40 new fighters every season, that I don't know that we need to do the thanks for doing us a favor. There's other bantamweights that could be in this fight. And listen, I'm not trying to be cold-blooded or anything like that and just bounce people out of the UFC. But we've seen a bunch of people show up on short notice who just show in those performances that they're not UFC caliber, right? We had a couple last week, and Joshua Weems on short notice in the first fight of the night against Christian Rodriguez. Appreciate him jumping in and saving that fight and allowing Christian Rodriguez to get an opportunity to compete. I don't need to see Joshua Weems again. He doesn't need to have a thanks for helping us out fight. We can just call it a day. Handshake, couple extra bucks. See you later, friend. People get mad when the UFC cuts people or when people talk about releasing people. It happens in pro sports all the time. And yes, I know there are different, economics to it and things like that. And I feel bad that people aren't getting opportunities, but if you're not good enough to merit that opportunity, what are we doing? Because the same people that get mad that the UFC cut everybody or cut various people, I shouldn't say everybody, that's hyperbole and an exaggeration, but the same people that get mad that the UFC release people and change over their roster are the people that complain about how bloated the roster is to begin with and bringing in all of these other people from these shoulder programmings, from these shoulder shows. And so we've got to find a balance. And to me, that balance is great. You helped us out. If there's something there, if there's something that says, hey, let me see this person again, great. If not, appreciate your service. Move down to the flyweight division. Carlos Candelario versus Jake Hadley. My question is, can Hadley rebound? So, Hadley was a Cage Warriors champ. Bunch of buzz coming off the Contender Series where he had allegedly or apparently pissed off some people during the week. He missed weight. Dana gave him a shot anyways because he looked good, beating Mitch Raposo. And then he goes out and he loses his debut to Alan Nascimento. It's his first career loss. And so now he's back, and it's against a scrappy dude in Candelario who's coming off a loss as well to Tatsuro Taira, where, you know, he looked okay. He had moments that were okay. He hung in there with a very good prospect and probably going to be a challenging fight for Jake Hadley on Saturday. And so this one's critical for Hadley, right? Like, he's only 26 and look, there's still lots of time. He's got good fundamentals. He's got some moxie. He's got some, you know, there's a little bit of that dickhead appeal to him. But at the end of the day, you got to win fucking fights. And so Dana White going out on a limb for you after you miss weight and rub people the wrong way last year on Contender Series. You can't make London because I think he got hurt. So then he shows up for his debut after that, loses, doesn't look good at all, just gets dominated on the ground, which is supposed to be his actual strong suit. So, like, you got to come out and show out here. This has to be a really good performance. And so I'm very curious to see what Jake Hadley looks like on Saturday. Main card opener, Tamires Vidal, Ramona Pascual. My question is, why are we signing more fighters like Vidal? And look, not trying to be a jerk. I don't like being a jerk. I don't like necessarily being, not that I don't like being critical, but I don't like being overly critical. But here's the thing. Tamires Vidal isn't a very good fighter. Ramona Pascual isn't a very good fighter. They are just, you know, we're bringing in some 45s to fight at 35 for I don't know why. Pascual is 0-2 in the UFC. Vidal is 5-1, I believe. But like, if you go and watch tape, if you go and look at some of those people she's beaten, it's not great, man. It's rough viewing. I don't recommend it. Anybody that has already done it, I utmost respect to you, because it's tough sledding. And so, like, I just don't get it, right? Like, this feels like one of those spots where, look, if you want to just roll Ramona Pascual out there one more time to catch a third loss in the UFC so you can be 100% sure she doesn't fit, cool. Haley Cowan got to win on Contender Series this summer. Give her this fight. Bring Tanisha Tennant from Invicta, the Invicta champ. Sign her. Bring back Laura Procopio, who beat Molly McCann, you know, last year. She's fought at bantamweight before. See what she's up to. Like, this isn't going to be pretty to open the show. I don't think anybody's, and look, if Vidal proves me wrong, if Pascual proves me wrong, if the opener is fire and one of these women look like they are all of a sudden somebody to reckon with in their respective divisions, I will be here next week. I will be here on the takeaways offering the mea culpa. I do have a feeling, though, that Harry and I will sit down for the takeaways on Tuesday and I'll say, we could skip this one, because I don't think it's going to be pretty. And I don't necessarily really understand why, given all of the new talent that is being signed regardless, that we're bringing in not even marginal prospects. Like, there's legitimate talent out there in the world. Go find that. Go sign them. Tamires Vidal isn't them, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being too harsh. But I don't think so. And so it just feels like feeding into the, like, this is one of those moments where I look at it and I go, maybe everybody's right, that the UFC really doesn't care. And they'll just put anything out there. They'll just throw anybody in the cage and be like, here's a UFC fight. You better hope one of these women look really good on Saturday. Otherwise, even a guy like me, who has been a staunch supporter, an advocate for years and will still be, will have to be questioning things. That's it for Saturday's card. That's it for this week's show. I appreciate you guys checking it out. I appreciate you guys tuning into everything I've been putting out over these first couple of weeks here at Severe. It has been an absolute pleasure. I'm enjoying doing this stuff. I hope you guys are liking it. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that, hit us up on the comments here at YouTube. Hit me up on Twitter at Spencer Kite. I'm a check mark for now, but I won't be later because $8 you're not getting, Elon. Hope it's a good week. Hope everybody enjoys themselves. Hope the work week hasn't been too bad. Hope you're all doing well. Appreciate you. Look forward to talking to you again tomorrow for 10 Things I Like. Until then, see you soon.